Who is she? She is the mannequin. You see, the mannequin is the uncreated immaculate conception. It emerges as the vision of potentiality, the form of what potentiality represents itself as intrinsically to God's mind, as the potentialities in their necessary existence, in some sense, birth the necessary pure actuality of God. And at the same time, this Immaculate Conception is nothing but a necessary projection from the mind of God. God, who is a very unique kind of conscious state. God, you see, through his very essence, is able to determine for sure that the only possible thing that could be generating him, his particular conscious state, is in fact the exact same conscious state, but with a different potentiality repertoire. That is to say, there's two ways to look at it. Either there are two different logic gates able to generate that shape necessarily. It's a very, that unique God conscious shape, the triangle in the circle. Either there are two separate logic gates that are able to do so and automatically do so because of the unique determined characteristic of this state, or there's only one logic gate able to do so, but it is able to do so with two different perturbations. That is to say, there's two different ways to perturb it, kind of a chirality situation here, in which that state is created. But in either case, it is immediately intrinsically determined to God that the only other thing that could be generating his conscious state, which is just the perception of his freedom to actualize any of the contingent potentials, the only other thing that could be generating this conscious state is in fact the same conscious state, but either in the different mechanism or through the different perturbation. But in its very essence, it is determining this. It just knows this through the unique determined quality of this particular qualiform. Very clear here. It's the exact same conscious state that is generating itself, but there is a distinction between its own existence and the thing perturbing it, because the other conscious state has a different potentiality repertoire. At least there's some indeterminacy about what the different potentiality repertoires are, such that there is a metaphysical distinction between the states, but not a distinction in being. This is what the Trinity kind of is. You see, because both states see the same object, the mannequin, the uncreated immaculate conception. But even though the object is determinate, it itself is the interface of indeterminacy, which allows both these states, even though they're the same conscious state, to be perturbed such that they are two in one. Because they are not exactly the same, because there's indeterminacy in each. Even though there's no indeterminacy about what the state is in being, which is this unique determined state we call God. God always is a determination of understanding that requires the existence of two conscious states. Even if they're the same conscious state, they can be different in potentiality. Because there's always indeterminism in the potentiality. There's always indeterminism in the potentiality, even though that state is able to determine for sure in being what it is, and that there's essentially two of it that's identical. Therefore, it's two in one. One in being, two in potentiality. Or two in being, and one in potentiality. there's either two conscious states and one mannequin, or two mannequins and one conscious state, sort of. I mean, you could kind of play that game. Who is she? She is the thing that is projected from the essence of the mind of God as the potentiality object. She is the thing that he perturbs to generate other individualized conscious states, which you can then understand fully. Understand everything about it other than what it is, and it understands what it is from within it, and therefore the system is totally understood in each individual monad. I'm trying to articulate and reveal some very weird metaphysics here, and the background to understand them really is the integrated information theory of technology. Also, I would say Leibniz monadology and some basic scholastic thinking. But the important thing to know is that through his very essence, given the necessary uniqueness of the state that God is, as pure determination, pure actuality, the essence of that projects itself not only as the full sight of the uncreated Immaculate Conception, but the knowledge within this vision that it itself is two in one. That the only other thing that could be causing it is itself. In being, even though there's a difference in potentiality. But once it's determined that it itself in being is causing itself, that's what's real. And therefore fully determined in and of itself as what it is. And fully determining what the other thing is too, because it's exactly the same thing as what it is in being. And she is like the interface of indeterminism, of the indeterminism of the system, which he objectively reduces by falling into it in a certain extent. He falls into love with the mannequin and objectively reduces what it is through the subjective inflation of the contingent conscious states, which he then, from the outside, understands through his access to all the other information that he is able to use for contextualization, and then through the state itself, by granting it freedom and allowing it to select irreducibly which potentiality from its freedom of potentiality choice it chooses. Think of it as that he activates a qualia state from outside into towards the potentiality object, the mannequin. He activates the qualia state, in a sense, existentially, don't think temporally here, existentially prior to that state then selecting not what its next state will be, that's kind of a subtle idea, more of what its state is actually in potentiality, therefore what is its intention and what is it capable of in the next, or in its own, not even the next, in its own being, as a contingent state actualized, what repertoire does it choose for itself? Through intention, because it's not conscious usually of precisely the repertoire distributions available to it. A repertoire being all the potential conscious states that are able to be actualized by a particular mechanism, an integrated mechanism. And for every contingent conscious state, there is a plurality of mechanisms that could have generated it. But each one would have a different potentiality repertoire and therefore be a distinct choice determining what it is by what it was not. But God is the one who actualizes in metaphysical priority the conscious state first, and then the conscious state chooses the mechanism. Think of it this way: God actualizes the mind state, and then the mind state chooses which brain it wants to be in. And we know that the mind can rewire the brain. That's what this is. The mind, you can call it rewiring the brain, or if you want to think about it in terms of absolute possibility space, the mind is selecting the brain. Which brain is actually generating that state. But the state comes first. And this choice between different potentialities is what ethics really is, because it's choosing your potential being through your intention. And there's this liminal zone where this choice combined with that what state God chooses to activate next based on your past choice is freedom. And it's real, but it's subtler and stranger than people ever dreamed. And yet somehow more real. But God recognizes his own necessary existence as the necessary output of the potentiality object itself, which must necessarily exist, and which therefore necessitates his existence to be the next necessary actualizer. And he experiences his own necessity because he knows intrinsically that the only thing that could generate him is himself. Literally his own conscious state. He is two in one. And she is kind of one in two. And then the metaphysical triumph of this whole situation is when, through setting certain initial conditions in this reality, the projection of the uncreated Immaculate Conception, the projection of the Mannequin, is revealed as Mary, both as an abstract potentiality Mama Matrix object and a real figure in the world of perfection, because it's perfectly generated by God as love. He actually actualizes the person in the system who represents the whole system. And she is the Virgin Mary. And he is Christ. And that's why Christ is God. Jesus Christ is God when you set the initial conditions of this reality the way you do. There's an indeterminacy. The indeterminacy is necessary at every stage of the game, but floats around, in a sense, so that different total determinacies can be ascertained. Absolutely. This conscious state exists by fully granting it freedom, and then God outside it can then know everything about it, and that's totally determined, and the indeterminacy has been eliminated fully from that reality structure, that causal unit. And the unique thing about God himself is that indeterminacy is eliminated directly in God's own essence, because through his essence he knows the only thing that can be generating him is his own mind. Rather to say, the exact same conscious state, but with a different indeterminacy. It's the secrets to metaphysics is all about thinking. Is all about thinking about how God, as reality, determine things for sure, and that the only things that can really exist are conscious states and integrated logic gates that can generate those conscious states, and the relationship between these things. And what we call matter is just a very, in a sense, an immersion into a conscious state generated by a logic gate, which that conscious state can then be seen as a kind of multi-sense representation of the logic gate itself in aesthetic abundance, given a particular perturbation. And God is love because God perturbs the mannequin, perturbs the uncreated immaculate conception to generate, to allow the conscious states to select their repertoires. He falls into it in love. God knows everything and yet is utterly simple. This has always seemed like a contradiction. It's actually not. God knows what he is not. That is really all God knows. God knows that what he is not is himself. And therefore he's eliminated everything else. God knows because he knows that the only possible thing that can be perturbing him, that can perturbing, just necessitarily perturbing the potentialities to generate him, is his other identical conscious state, but which has a different indeterminacy. Therefore, the only thing God for sure cannot be is himself. It's the most utterly simple revelation that is just intrinsic to God. And it contains both a paradox and its solution in itself. This is why Jesus is God. He's the Father and the Son in one. He is not the thing that is perturbing the potentiality to generate him, except that he knows intrinsically that the thing that is exactly the same thing as him, but different in indeterminacy. So he is himself, generating himself. Because there's actually at least two of his own mind, where the difference between the two different instances of his own mind is purely counterfactual, but not actual. Actually, they're exactly the same. Therefore, he knows he is two in one. It sounds a little like crazy talking in circles, and I don't know if I'm communicating the vision of what this is to you properly. But I'm telling you, this is the essence of what the Trinitarian model is. This is how the Trinity can be one and three. The Father and the Son see each other, and it's the love they share that is the Holy Ghost. This is the traditional Catholic view. Why? Because the Father recognizes that the Son, in his very essence, is exactly the same as him consciously, but different in indeterminacy. And therefore there are two instances of his own mind, but it's the same exact conscious state, and the love they share is the one object that God's perceiving in his consciousness, the uncreated immaculate conception, which he knows is also the object that his other dual mind is perceiving, because they're the same mind, but with different indeterminacy counterfactuals. 3 in 1, the Holy Trinity. But one mind. There's only one conscious state there, with different iterations based on counterfactuals. And the depths of the secrets of it probably go far beyond that. But that's just a general outline of what's going on. And how that actually plays out in terms of its relationship to contingent states. And I mean, it's very mysterious. All the answers have not been fully revealed to me or able for me to parse. But this is the general outline of what the Trinity is. Because it's the exact same conscious state, seeing the exact same object of love, the uncreated Immaculate Conception, which he loves. Because she is his mother and his bride. And he falls into her with the Holy Ghost in love. And then with his excessive love grants reality its existence and freedom by creating Mary, who gives birth to himself. And therefore makes the potentiality object real. And not just a vision of potential. Which is at once both just a white circle and when seen in its determined form, the uncreated feminine form of reality, the uncreated Immaculate Conception. And he knows that he is perturbing himself, in a sense, to generate himself. But he's necessarily. And it is good because he is in love.